This is Nate Robinson, former NBA player and three-time dunk contest champion. But in 2024, retired and only 39 years old still, Nate was often found in a clinic. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Nate and over 550,000 Americans go to a dialysis center, spending over 4 hours getting their kidneys filtered by a machine. Nate's kidney failure was caused by high blood pressure, a condition that 122 million Americans live with. For 4 years while he waited for a transplant, his life revolved around those 3 weekly sessions. There was really nothing else he could actually do. Until he made a video that was shown at a Washington Huskies football game. A person named Shane Cleveland saw the video on the big screen, scanned a QR code, and eventually gave Nate a second chance at life in early 2025. But Nate had a massive platform to be able to find somebody who could be a kidney donor for him. For most of the other 550,000 others, they're left to navigate a system dominated by two names, DaVita and Fresenius. These two giants own an estimated 71.7% of the US dialysis market. It is the most concentrated industry in all of US healthcare and one of the most concentrated industries in the entire United States economy. This duopoly, as it's been called, has led to staggering economic repercussions, with American taxpayers effectively footing the bill for much of their growth. In this video, we're going to look at those repercussions and how one of these companies went from the brink of total failure to paying their CEO over $73 million in 2021. And finally, we'll see why the business is positioned to become more lucrative over the next decade, unless something big changes. Let's dive in. The slow death of small businesses and the rise of dominant, too-big-to-fail corporations in America is perhaps nowhere more obvious than in the US dialysis market. But before we get into the market, we need some context. Basically, how does an industry turn a medical tragedy into a $30 billion subscription model? Let's look at the disease. End-stage renal disease, ESRD, is a life-altering diagnosis. Your kidneys are your body's internal filtration system, so they process about 200 liters or 51 gallons of blood every single day. When they fail, that process stops and it's a permanent, irreversible breakdown, which means the business model here is fueled by a predictable supply chain. And as long as these chronic conditions keep rising, dialysis chairs will stay full. Right now, over 550,000 Americans are reliant on the dialysis system, with roughly 131,000 more joining them every single year. In a perfect world, these patients would get a transplant and move on. But in the United States, the transplant list is an absolute nightmare. If a patient even does get a transplant, they typically wait anywhere from 3 to 7 years for a donor. And many, including Nate Robinson during his 4-year wait, simply have to sit in a chair and do the treatments. 30% of Americans live in a zip code where there is only one option. It's a take it or leave it market where leaving it isn't an option if you want to stay alive. Now, a little bit more context, and this is a little bit of a complicated bit, but just stay with me here. In 1972, the US government did something that it has never done for any other disease. It signed a blank check. Before this, dialysis was so expensive that hospitals had what they called God committees. Panels of doctors who literally decided who lived and who died based off who could afford the treatment. For obvious reasons, there was medical outrage, and President Nixon signed a law guaranteeing Medicare coverage for nearly everyone with kidney failure, regardless of their age or their income. When it was signed, they expected to cover about 24,000 people. And as you know now, there's a lot more. What started as a safety net turned into a massive taxpayer-funded revenue machine. When a government guarantees it'll pay for a service, it removes the biggest risk to any business: not getting paid. Big corporations got in, and as money poured in, small independent clinics couldn't keep up with the scale required to compete. They were swallowed up by two massive machines that realized if you control the chairs, you control the direct pipeline to the US Treasury. Enter DaVita and Fresenius. To understand how the $30 billion model works, you have to understand the two companies that built it. The first one is Fresenius. In the US alone, Fresenius operates over 2,500 locations and employs roughly 125,000 people. They control about 33.9% of the American market, but their real power is in the hardware. Because they make their machines and supplies, they're essentially their own biggest customer. When a patient sits in a Fresenius chair, they're likely using a Fresenius machine filtered by a Fresenius dialyzer using a Fresenius chemical concentrate. And in most major cities, Fresenius is just one half of the co-dominant power struggle. The other is DaVita. In 1999, the American company didn't even exist under that name. It was called Total Renal Care, and it was a financial disaster on the brink of total collapse. But after a massive restructure and rebrand to DaVita, the company launched one of the most aggressive acquisition strategies in the history of US healthcare. Over the next 2 decades, DaVita acquired an insane number of its smaller competitors. They ended up giving doctors equity in DaVita, which where's a doctor going to recommend that their new dialysis patient go if they actually own a stake in the company? But today, the company that almost failed has exploded into a clinical empire with 3,200 locations and nearly 70,000 employees. They generated $12.82 billion in revenue in their most recent fiscal year, and as we mentioned, that success trickles up. In 2021, they paid their CEO $73.4 million in total compensation, as it was reported. But here's the thing, if 90% of your business is paid for by the government, you're gonna get a very stable company. But you're not gonna get a company that justifies a $73 billion total compensation package for their CEO. You have to make a fortune off the other 10% for that. In the dialysis world, there's a very specific clock that starts ticking the moment a patient is diagnosed. It's called the 30-month coordination period. For the first 2.5 years of treatment, if a patient has private insurance from their job, the insurance company has to stay as the primary payer, meaning they have to be the ones that pay the dialysis bill. Only after those 30 months does the Medicare for All safety net kick in and start to pay the bill for the patient. And this created the single most powerful financial dynamic in the industry, the payer differential. When Medicare takes over, they pay a flat base rate that is currently $281.71 per treatment. With 156 treatments a year for patients, that's about $44,000 in guaranteed revenue per patient. It's a solid floor, but the margins aren't great there. But while the patient is still in their 30-month window, the private insurance companies are being billed at rates roughly 4 times higher than Medicare. So 2 people could be sitting right next to each other in those dialysis chairs, and one's insurance company is paying $1,000 per treatment, while the other one is paying a little under $300. This creates a massive economic incentive for them to focus on patients with private, employer-led insurance. And here's another thing. In most industries, you have to spend millions of dollars to find new customers. In the dialysis business, the demographics do the marketing for you. The US population is aging at a rate that we've never seen before. By 2050, the number of Americans aged 65 or older will grow from 58 million to 82 million. That's a 40% increase in the exact group most vulnerable to chronic kidney disease. And many of these Americans are working longer than ever before, which will place more of an economic burden on American businesses. But for DaVita and Fresenius, this is a tailwind scenario. They have a dominant market share, a government guaranteed revenue floor, and a customer base that is statistically certain to grow for the next 3 decades. While Nate Robinson found his miracle through his platform, for the hundreds of thousands of others, the machine is the only thing keeping them alive. And for the 2 companies that own those machines, business has never been better. If you found this video interesting, you'd like to see more like it in the future, please consider subscribing for more. This is Tyler Dutchover. Thanks for watching.